most of you follow me for D&D stuff like world building and journal making, a lot of you follow me for my digital art and character design. But there are a good number of you who follow me through thick and thin, including the times where I try something really random like video game fan art, map making, or even traditionally painting something. And something I haven't done in a long time for this channel is paint a 3D printed mini. Last time I did this, I painted a copper dragon from Dungeons and Dragons, and this time I'm painting more dragons, kinda, not really. These creatures are from the much beloved franchise of Monster Hunter, and we are painting 3 of them: Dodogama, Rathalos, and Alatreon. These pieces are going to be shipped off to a friend of mine, but I have personally spent a bit of time in a couple of the Monster Hunter games, my first one being Monster Hunter World, which I really enjoyed, and then having spent less time but more recently played Monster Hunter Rise. I haven't played any of the newest one, Monster Hunter Wilds, and I really have no experience or thoughts on it at all, but as far as what I've experienced from my very small window of the Monster Hunter franchise, they are gorgeous games with very pretty environments, cool creatures, and they really love to push a sense of scale in the fights. And also you get to have cute Palico companions, and I love cats, so you know I spent hours in the customization screen just looking through all the possible options. Now, if I really wanted to be a perfectionist about this, I probably should have taken some acetone or maybe some sandpaper to these guys to try and get the 3D printer layer lines to be a little less obvious before I started putting down a base coat. But alas, I did not. That being said, I think these prints are quite beautiful even without any post-processing. These were printed with a Bamboo Lab X1C, and my husband really wanted me to let anyone from Bamboo Lab out there know that he would be more than happy to accept a sponsorship on my behalf because he adores their products. But what I didn't adore was my brand new, literally never used little battery airbrush deciding to just not do airbrush things. It was just a constant battle of paint being too wet or paint being too thick or the battery running out or just little bits not being properly attached. I have never in my life owned a well-behaved airbrush. Every creator I watch online struggles with their airbrush. I'm starting to think that airbrushes might actually just be cursed objects designed to cause pain and suffering. I did manage to get Dodogama and Rathalos both a relatively decent base coat. Alatreon is just gonna have to wait for a minute. We'll figure out what to do with them later. So starting off with Dodogama because, you know, honestly, I don't know why. I just felt like painting him first. It's really not that deep. For being a monster that eats rocks and crystals and then spews molten exploding rock back out at you, everyone seems to be really endeared by him. Pretty much every single one of my friends who have played Monster Hunter love Dodogama. In fact, the quest where you have to hunt a Dodogama is called Can't Bring Yourself to It, and the quest description states that the reason research has stopped in that area is because the other hunters find the wild Dodogama in the area to be too cute to hunt. And honestly, I agree. Just look at that big belly and those vacant eyeballs. So first come in the flats, and we're low-key already off to a pretty rough start. I love watching people make dioramas, and oftentimes what they do is start off with really bright, jarring colors and then do a dark wash to both unify and desaturate the whole palette of the project. And I wanted to do the same thing, except I have neither the experience to know what colors to start with, nor the confidence to fully commit to bright colored flats. The real problem was less that I was completely wrong and more that I backtracked from a good idea and changed my process halfway through. I was worried that my Dodogama was too neon and jarring, so I panicked and messed with the colors a little too much, so my blues ended up being too dark and the colors I used for his belly ended up being too light, which made them very difficult to unify with just a single wash. To be fair, blue is kind of a difficult color to get to look natural, and in references of Dodogama, it's a little hard to tell if he's light blue, like his icon kind of implies, or if he's actually a pretty vibrant blue and just covered in loads of dust because he's constantly rolling around on the ground. Another thing that I struggled with a lot were the stripes on his back. Dodogama has not quite but an almost striped pattern on his back. In most art references, all of these stripes are sort of connected in the middle, but when I was working on it, I felt my pattern placement was weird and a little bit off for one reason or another. It looked more like a strange starburst, so I ended up just making a bunch of stripes. What I definitely think would have saved me at this part was just a little bit more patience. I was trying to get a very blended look between the scale transition from yellow to blue, so the stripes didn't look so jarringly perfect, but I ended up muddying the colors instead. I think if I had waited a little bit for the blue to dry and then went over top with maybe less of an orangey yellow, I could have gotten a much better result. But we live and we learn, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on painting models. I think he looks quite snazzy with stripes. It may not be totally perfectly accurate, but animals in the wild have all kinds of variations in their patterns, so I think it's okay. I often am hypercritical of my own art, partially because most artists are, and also low-key I think I feel that if I'm openly disappointed, nobody can be more disappointed than I already am, so it's only up from here. That being said, even though my colors were feeling off and I didn't feel like this was my best work, painting all of his little spikes black helped a lot, and it definitely helped it not feel like it was all for nothing. I alternated between a dark wash to emphasize the scales and ridges and shadows in his design, and a couple of different dusty gray-brown washes to help him look like he's been dragging himself around in the dust and dirt as he does in the game. Honestly, I think washes and dry brushing make a huge difference for final results, and they can cover just a load of mini painting sins and mistakes. The washes going on made me feel a lot better about how the whole thing went down. I still think I could have done better, but I mean, it's like the third 3D printed figure I've painted in my life, and I haven't painted one in over a year, so it's just a warm-up. It's just a warm-up. On to mini number 2, although I don't know if you can really call it a mini when it's more of a bust sculpture situation, but I digress. If you are familiar with anything Monster Hunter at all, you most likely know who this bad boy is. This is Rathalos, probably the most iconic creature from the Monster Hunter franchise. Rathalos has appeared in every single game in the Monster Hunter series, including all of the spin-off games. In-game called the Kings of the Skies, Rathalos are these huge winged wyverns with bright black and red markings. They breathe fire and have poison in their claws, and sometimes even attack with their big spiky tail. There are some special subspecies or variants of Rathalos that exist across the games, including the Azure Rathalos and the Silver Rathalos, but for the one I'm painting here today, we're going with the classic red Rathalos as we know and love him. I will say honestly that this is probably my favorite of the 3 that I painted for this video. For one, it was easier. There were a lot fewer teeny tiny details that I needed to worry about because obviously instead of a whole body, it was just the head. And what would have been a bunch of tiny scales and spikes were these much larger plates with more defined features. And for 2, the colors blend super well together. Trying to create a natural transition between the orangey yellow and bright blue of Dodogama was really difficult, whereas the blacks and reds of Rathalos were super easy to blend together seamlessly. The most difficult part of the Rathalos was trying to make sure he didn't look cross-eyed, goofy, and uneven when looking at him from the front. Learning from my Dodogama, instead of panicking, I started out by putting in distinct sharp flats, marking out the different areas on his face where the different colors should go. I was very consciously not worrying about the transitions and blending as much, and just focused on making sure that each section was a correct flat color. And only after I got those bits even on both sides did I start to create a range of reds of different depths to go in different areas like you see on the models. Although it was at this point that I found a couple of odd differences between the model I was painting and the models of Rathalos that I was familiar with. Specifically, I was concerned about this odd horn spike on its jaw and the way the scales down the back of its neck look. It just didn't quite match up with what I'm used to and what I was seeing in a lot of online references from the newer games. And for a minute, I kind of panicked that I might accidentally be painting Rathalos' female counterpart, Rathian, instead. Rathian also features a little pointy ears and the sort of crown of scales on her head, but she has a much longer chin spike and her jaw protrusions look a little bit different from Rathalos. So I went down a bit of a research rabbit hole, and turns out older models of Rathalos kinda did have something that looked a little bit like a horn spike on the jaw, but specifically the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate version of Rathalos really featured a prominent looking jaw spike. So the more you know, I guess. But with the last finishing details of a dark wash, a tiny bit of dry brushing, and defining the eyes, our beautiful Rathalos is complete. So on to our last mini model of the video, we have the beautiful Elder Dragon Alatreon. Alatreon first appeared in Monster Hunter 3, but in more recent games they show up in a quest in the Iceborne DLC for Monster Hunter World. I personally have no experience fighting Alatreon because I didn't get that far and have the attention span of a fruit fly, but I do know that the fight is notoriously difficult. Alatreon can breathe blasts of flames as well as a freezing breath of ice crystals. They can summon lightning and can infuse their body with draconic strength. They just have a little bit of everything. But we're back at it again with hundreds and hundreds of teeny tiny spikes. Before I had the airbrush working, I had a really sad and uneven looking base coat that I was trying to put on. I was so fortunate and so happy to get my airbrush at least partially working for me again, and I managed to put down a little bit of a gray base coat. It sounds a little weird to describe, but there's a sort of toothiness and texture to airbrushed paint that helps your additional layers of paint adhere better to the figure, which is nice, especially since when painting minis you want relatively thinned down paints so you don't lose texture or definition in your base model, but not too thin down paints, or else you're basically doing washes and all of your color will just sit in the crevices of where gravity takes it. Alatreon can be found inside of a volcano, and in most in-game pictures he's seen backlit by fire or molten rock, and he has these very pretty wings that go from a dark purpley black to a light orange color. And he also shifts appearances slightly with his various abilities, so it was a little difficult to find consistently lit references for him. So I figured the easiest thing for me to do was base my painted Alatreon off of Capcom's official Alatreon figure. There is still some variation between them. Some of them are more blue, some of them are more orange, some of them are more purple, but for the most part there was a pretty consistent iridescent looking rainbow vibe to the wings and the body being black. And I love that. I think it is such a pretty dragon. And again, thank goodness the airbrush was working again to get me the nice transition to the orange color at the end of the wings. I don't know what I would have done without that. The hardest part was definitely painting the lines where the wing bones go, painting them black and trying to be so careful to make sure they didn't smudge onto my pretty gradient wings. The process was made even more difficult by the fact that Hawkins wanted to be just so present for this part of the painting. I love him dearly, but boy howdy does this orange boy know exactly the best time to be the most destructive little guy. I genuinely thought that painting Alatreon would take so much longer than it did. I mean, it still delayed this video from coming out when I wanted it to, but I honestly wasn't confident that I was going to have it painted for this video at all. I don't know if it was the aid of the airbrush or the confidence of having spent the last week painting little wyverns and getting back into the practice of things, but I was genuinely stunned at how quickly and beautifully Alatreon came together. I didn't do a ton of dark washing like I did for the other creatures, but I did add a dark purple wash to the wings to help the transition from black to the gradient colors look a little more smooth and natural. But that is our final monster for the video, so let's go on to the reveal. These were super fun to do. I miss painting little guys. I should do that more often. And I always say that at the end of these kinds of videos, and then I don't, just because large physical projects always take so much more time to set up and get started. But that being said, I am trying to make an effort to do more physical projects. And if you like a variety of crafty projects and digital art and you're not subscribed, I would love to have your continued support. Every watch helps me out, and I try to release a video every Friday, or at least one for each week. But on that note, I am going to seal these guys with a nice protective clear coat and then ship them off to my friend. Hopefully he likes them, and even more so, hopefully they don't break or chip during the mailing process. Fingers crossed. But as always, who knows? Not me.